If you've clicked here, then you've almost certainly heard of VS Code. In fact, you might already use it. But you've probably also heard whispers of a code editor that sweat lords across the land are using, doing absolutely nutty stuff like surgically implanting code snippets or wiping entire blocks in the blink of an eye like gods. We're talking about Neovim. Getting into this code editor is incredibly hard. So hard, in fact, that exiting it is effectively the final boss. So depending on your experience level, it might be an absolute amazing experience, or it could be hell on earth. I've got good news for you though. There are quite a few commitment levels that you can take, and you can stop whenever you feel uncomfortable. I like to think of them as layers. The first layer being the motions, the second layer being the plugins, the third being the environment. Each of these have their own huge challenges, and they progressively get tougher as you go along, especially the second one. I feel like there's a huge difficulty spike in the second one, which we'll be getting to. But what I plan to do is to help you understand what layer might be best for you, or whether you just want to run right back to VS Code, which is equally understandable, by the way. The Neovim's a lot. So the first layer is the editor. The editor, when we're talking about it right now, I'm talking raw, unfiltered Neovim. No plugins, nothing. Just you, the text in front of you, and whatever the heck comes out of the box in Neovim. At this point, you will need to install a terminal emulator. This will help you be able to render all of the things that Neovim is capable of rendering. Some examples include WesTerm, Kitty, or Alacrity. From there, we'll assume that you've installed Neovim through the Neovim repository instructions. So let's say you're in the editor now, right? It is a lot like gaming. There's a ton of abilities that you have. There's a ton of creative ways that you can combine these abilities. So for example, I like to think of it as like a puzzle game where it's like, hey, there's a line of code here. How do I get this line of code to be in a different state? Or how do I move this somewhere else? Or how do I surgically change a particular part of the code? There's a ton of ways that you could do any given action in Neovim, but the fun part is figuring out how to do it in the least amount of keystrokes. Another thing too with it is you're saying goodbye to your mouse. You're not using your mouse because the whole point is to keep your hands on the keyboard the whole time that you're working in the code. This also means that you're not using the arrow keys either. Yeah, it's technically the keyboard, but HJKL is technically closer to the rest of the keyboard rather than the arrows. You have to move your entire hand over to the arrows to be able to do something. It sounds silly, but that's kind of the entire point, right? Is to just be as, I guess, ergonomical as possible. Try to reduce the amount of movements that your hand is doing at any given time. And it adds up. All of these different micro optimizations do add up over time. There's so many different specific combinations of things you can do. And what's interesting is you start to not think of them as individual letters, but rather a sequence of motions. You start to think of it as, oh, well, I just need to do this, then I need to do this, then I need to do this. What's funny about this is that it looks kind of ridiculous when you're looking at the editor, but when you're used to doing it, it kind of feels like, okay, well, I just want to do this thing, then I want to do this thing, then I want to do this thing. And to an outside viewer, it just looks like a bunch of gibberish. Like, I mean, look at this. Like, it's insane, right? But I think that's what's cool about it is you don't have to move your mouse. You can keep your hands where they are. You can kind of just change the text in a way that you want to do it. But anyway, this layer alone will use up a ton of time. That's totally fine. I mean, if you treat it like a video game, like I had mentioned before, I think you'll find that there's some fun to it. It's like a puzzle, a nice little puzzle. However, this is not ideal for your development environment. I'm going to be honest. If you're just using raw Neovim for your development environment, you're just gonna be missing so many critical features, which we will get into in the second layer. But a warning on the second layer, this one will stop people in their tracks. This is an order of magnitude on top of learning the motions. So get ready for that. So second layer, this is the plugin layer. Now you're probably fine now at this point with learning the motions. You're probably still picking them up. That's all cool. But you'll very quickly notice a problem. There are no features. Like look at VS Code as by itself, right? In Neovim, there's no file browser. There's no shortcuts for finding or searching. You don't know what git changes you've made. The code highlighting is incredibly bare bones. There's no autocomplete. There's all sorts of other stuff too, but you get the idea. The general consensus is something like VS Code is such a great tool because you get so much out of the box. You don't have to change anything. And when you want something, you just go and get it. There's like a little magical button you just go and press, and then you type in the thing you want, and then you just go and you get it, and it's perfect. It's amazing. But with Neovim, nope. So if you want your Neovim setup to have parity with VS Code, it's going to require some work. And for reference, I've spent over a month just working on my setup when I first started, and then I still have a to-do list of improvements. Neovim primarily uses Lua for its plugins. There's an infinite number of ways that you could organize these plugins, and basically installing them will solve the problems that I mentioned before. This includes like the file searching, Git support, highlighting, autocomplete, all that stuff. As a fun fact, some people will store their configurations publicly. You can actually just go on GitHub and find all kinds of different setups that people have for Neovim. I even have one. So if for some reason you want to spiritually feel closer to me, then that's the way to do it right there. You can take my Neovim setup and you can just use it yourself. Or maybe you just want to use it for reference. Whatever your purposes might be. I do want to point out the fun of using Neovim to edit the configuration for itself. That's what I did a lot of the time. I highly recommend you do it too. Anyway, there's a few ways that you can install plugins to customize your Neovim. The first way is from scratch, the Sweatlord approach, which is absolutely nuts. This means you just go on Google, you look up different Neovim plugins for all the different things that you want to get, and you install them. That's tough. I'm not gonna lie, that's a tough one because you're gonna learn a lot, but it's incredibly impractical given the amount of time that you have on Earth. A lot of times it's good to kind of start with a template, which brings us to the second approach. This is the pre-made configuration approach. Now there are a ton of different pre-made configurations that you can look at for Neovim. I'll use Kickstart as an example for the sake of video length. This one, a lot of people have talked about, and it still exists now. Kickstart is a pretty standard configuration that is contained within one Lua file, and it's geared towards teaching people that are new to Neovim what plugins are like, how they work, and all sorts of other things. Now, the nice thing about a pre-made configuration is that you get that out-of-the-box convenience, but it comes with the downside of learning. If you don't learn how to mess about with the code, you're going to have a harder time customizing your setup. There's also the issue where there are plugins that you may not even really need or use, or perhaps key bindings that you don't kind of vibe with and you don't even realize that that's not the base Neovim. It's actually like a plugin, and there could be conflicts. So there is a bit of a weird thing there. You'd have to really sit down and learn everything it's telling you. The third approach that you could take with installing plugins is a hybrid approach, which is essentially using a base like Kickstart, taking the things you want, putting it in your own repository or wherever you store your configuration, and then tossing out the rest. Plus, once you start getting used to taking plugins out and putting them where you want them, you can get used to separating out the modules so that it's more easily read instead of having like one mega file. And it just generally helps you with learning your code organization skills, how modules work, and all sorts of other things in relation to Lua. Layer 2, you've got to really commit if you want to get into plugins. There's a lot of ways you can configure it. There's a lot of ways to overthink it, except that there will be a lot of times where you're coding and you're like, crap, I don't have a plugin for that. Or wait a second, this plugin might have this feature, but I'm going to have to do this later, or I need to go and address this now because this problem is a really huge pain point, right? Honestly, if you're going to hit this specific level, you're going to want this to be your primary project, not a side project you're doing while you're doing your actual project. I mean, like, sit down and obsess over this for a while. So you're fine with obsessing with all these plugins. You're the king and or queen of obsession, in fact. But now we have to get into the final layer, the final level, and that is everything outside of Neovim. So what do I mean by this? Neovim is a terminal app, and as a result, other terminal apps are eventually going to enter the conversation again. You're going to have all sorts of different problems that can be solved by Neovim, but really there's just better things that can be used as separate terminal apps. So for example, what if you're working in multiple repositories? What if you want Neovim and like a console available next to each other? What if you want a dedicated Git UI? First, we'll talk about terminal emulators. We actually briefly discussed these earlier in the video, but now we're going to kind of go into some more detail here. You really want to have a terminal emulator for Neovim. These are incredibly feature rich, and they have tons of different things like nerd fonts, more colors, formats like underlining, all types of stuff like that. To give a bit of perspective, here's what Neovim looks like when I am just using WesTerm. And then here is what it looks like when I'm using the basic Mac OS terminal. You might see a slight difference there. I personally use WesTerm as a terminal emulator. I'm pretty happy with it. It even uses Lua for its configuration, which is really nice. I barely have scratched the surface. My configuration for it's like, I don't know, like 10 lines of code maybe, and that's it. But there are people that really go crazy with it. It's really cool for an application. Next up is multiplexers. These are fantastic for just moving around. These sorts of things include tmux, screen, zelij, I believe that's how you pronounce it. But anyway, I personally use tmux, and really the biggest thing for me is being able to switch between different repositories without having to use too many keystrokes. You can do all sorts of stuff with it. You can split panes, so if you want like your Neovim on one side and then your terminal on another, you could do that. If you want your server that you're running to just be in a separate process somewhere else, then you can go and make a separate tab for that and not have to worry about it. It's just somewhere else. Because of this, I don't have to worry about creating new windows, and Lord forbid you do that, because then that means you have to use the mouse, and we're not trying to use the mouse here, guys. Come on. It does get weird though, because terminal emulators also seem to come with multiplexers. I have not tried that, so your mileage may vary, but I definitely recommend experimentation. Another one's Git. This one's a bit more of a simple one because I generally just use lazy Git. The idea is that you have your Neovim editor open, and perhaps you want to have a detailed view of your repository with fantastic controls for all the different Git things. Then LazyGit's a really good command line tool that I would recommend. Or, since we're talking about terminal, also just using the command line to use Git. I honestly recommend learning to use the command line with Git, because you begin to understand how each of the different operations work when you switch over to a UI. But just a recommendation. Just depends on whether you feel like learning Git or not. Regardless, it's all terminal stuff. It's all great for your NVIM environment. What's great about the third level is that once you've gotten past the second level, the third one kind of just comes automatically. I mean, you're already using the terminal emulator, so what's another thing like a multiplexer or just a Git service that you can use? At that point, you might as well just embrace the terminal life. And if that all seems reasonable, then you can just make the full commit. No pun intended. So what level of commitment do you see yourself getting to? Perhaps just the first level to see if you're going to try it. Perhaps the last level because you want to just go whole hog on it. Maybe you're just like, screw this, I'm going back to VS Code. I don't want any of this. Those are all valid. I would like to hear about it in the comments. Anyway, that is about it.